Ooh! I totally knew this was being recorded. I didn't just hear you howl and do it in unison.
And we didn't do the countdown joke again. Muscle and Feels podcast, the arguably, allegedly best podcast in the south coast of the UK, and more specifically in Southampton, and more specifically in the radius of Ocean Village, which is not
Well,
where I
we
live.
boxed, indeed.
Yeah, getting doxed, aka dox these nuts. I'm waiting. I'm awake at all times. Please. I mean, yeah, if I get doxed, it will be the police that will come. Unless I dox them first. Each and that's the master plan. Dox every police officer
Copying out
in
the
your
viewers too.
dox every police officer in your area, so then you can never get doxed. Be ahead, get ahead of them. Be a man. Um, that's the
For
new
the
thing.
listeners, that is a slowed down, heavy reverb version of the Single Male theme song.
Okay,
Basically,
so
the same.
we are here once again with a hot topic, something that needs to be discussed, and that is when paying attention to, or not just paying attention, discussing, and just delving into the depths of a certain topic makes sense and when it doesn't. Now, this may sound confusing at first, but I'll explain myself and explain where I got the idea for this topic. So, obviously, as you all know, myself and Milo are both researchers in sports science, sports scientists, coaches, and individuals who essentially make a living and contribute to make a living from coaching other people and doing communicating science and so on and so forth, but also to individuals who are very interested in learning more about how one can grow muscle, get stronger, and so on and so forth, but at the core level, obviously. Now, we recently had a podcast episode on Revive Stronger. Shout out Steve Hall with the good Dr. Mike Israel, where we discussed full range of motion versus partial range of motion at long muscle lengths for hypertrophy specifically, and a bit for strength. It was mostly Milo's and Mike's show, and it was a great discussion. I think there were no insane claims made by any side. I think for overall, Mike took the evidence on partials pretty well. Although I think we were both somewhat not fully agreeing with his final position per se, without that being a negative comment. Is that fair to say for you as well?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think ultimately the reason why he's not open to implementing partials yet comes down to whether or not he wants to communicate the message that partials might be something worth trying. And he's just not there in terms of wanting to be taking that different of a stance compared to before, I think. Like it's a
Yeah.
sort of thing where he's been doing full range of motion for a while. There's not that many studies out yet. So what he said, I think, is as a science communicator, he doesn't want to give the message to young, impressionable people that they should be going out and doing lengthened partials themselves, which I'm not sure I agree with, but I get the sentiment at the very least as a science communicator myself. So, more power to him in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. The one issue that I have with that, and obviously we only had X amount of time. We only had a finite amount of time on the podcast. The issue is that that approach should happen universally, not
Mm.
universally. It should happen for all topics, because in the past we've seen not. So now I'm not talking about Mike, but about the industry and the field in general, recommending things with a lot of confidence that have much less research behind them than lengthened partials do, or that or have much more much less evidence behind them than full ROM being better than lengthened partial has.
Yeah.
And we've also seen many people, especially even in the powerlifting world, recommend training approaches, techniques, and so on and so forth, that have really no formal scientific evidence behind them, and recommend them with a lot of confidence, like certain accessories for certain lifts, or certain approaches to competition peaking, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And it's worth recognizing as well is that when we say there's not much evidence behind it, there's a distinction to be made between how much evidence there is on something and how strong the evidence is, right?
Yeah.
There's supplements out there. I'm thinking of a few here where you have a good deal of studies on them now, but a lot of them have shown no difference in results compared to placebo, and some do. And so while you have a good amount of data, overall, the results aren't that compelling when you take into account that there is a bit of a publication bias going on, whereby significant results are more likely to get published and so forth. So when you take that into consideration, yeah, there's some data on them, but the data isn't that compelling. In this case, it's a case of there are only 4 studies comparing lengthened partials to a full range of motion, but the data is super consistent. You know, so out of 4 studies comparing lengthened partials to full range of motion, not to turn this into another range of motion episode, but we
Yeah, I
could.
was about to say.
Um, 3 studies have found a benefit in favor of lengthened partials for hypertrophy, and one found no difference. So with findings that consistent, yeah, there isn't a ton of data, but it is very consistent, and the data on it is strong. So that's where I'm a bit more inclined to give it a lot of faith, let's say, for the time being, right? If in a couple studies from now turns out full range of motion's 10 times better, then yeah, we'll revise our stances. But for the time being, I think it's a safe bet, reasonably.
Yeah, and the point is that this is not even about length and partials. It's about the approach that we have to data. And again, if you were to take this to court and try and make a case by presenting all the available scientific evidence showing that one is better than the other, partials and long muscle lengths would come slightly on top. So the rest is
Yeah, at this
speculation.
point, it would come entirely on top. There's no evidence in favor of full range of motion for now, compared to
Yeah,
length and partials.
and that's the point. Nobody's saying go and just do length and partials, or if you're doing full range. And I still implement some full range of motion training as well for whatever reasons. Anyways, we must acknowledge though that speculation and what makes sense intuitively, sure, still has implications for our practice, but at the same time, when we're having a scientific discussion and we are having a discussion among scientists, that's different than what we do in practice as coaches. So Milo as well, Milo and myself both work with many individuals of many different sporting backgrounds. Nobody's here saying only partials or long muscle lengths. For some individuals, I have said, yeah, we could do just just primarily partials. But anyways, the comment that inspired this episode was made, I think, was it on the Revive Stronger post? Maybe I think it was on, yeah, or your post. Anyways, a post about the podcast episode where a guy says, I think it's a guy, yeah, pretty sure it's a guy, says, "Can someone please tell me what's going on here?" Somebody else tells him, "Kinda debate full ROM versus partials," and then the response was, "I know what it is, but it's overkill and not really productive or helpful. A great coach simplifies," all caps. "They don't give dissertations for a simple 'it depends' answer. Too many online coaches do that to sound smart. Explain it in layman terms so people understand." Now, obviously, there's a point there, and the context matters. Now, the podcast that we did with Steve Hall was not a client consultation call or hey, simple ways to adjust your training to partial ranges of motion, or the range of motion guide. Even that wouldn't be the right context. The context was discussing the scientific evidence and having people with PhDs, and having Milo, who is almost almost finished with his PhD, aka finished in a week or so, um, on range of motion, and having those individuals discuss the details, the literature, any new literature that has come out, and the potential mechanisms, and really trying to understand why there may be a difference between the two ranges of motion, what explains the findings that we're seeing in the literature, and so on and so forth. There's a place for being very simple and communicating things in a simple and effective manner, but that sort of podcast is not it. And I've seen that type of comment in a couple of other, I think, a Facebook group and
Yeah.
some other comment sections where people were like, "Nah, man, you're overthinking this. Like, this is too much of a discussion."
I'd like to read a comment on the same post, actually. They got 10 likes. So clearly, it's a relatively widespread sentiment. And you can see this type of comment of just lift blow on many, many science communication, or even just discussion posts about lifting, right?
Yeah.
And even actually, fun fact, a couple days ago, a YouTube video was released where it was the title is "Getting Jacked is Simple, Don't Overthink It," and it got 500,000 views in 2 days by some guy who had no subscribers, basically.
I know
So
which
there is,
video you mean. I saw it as well.
yeah, I saw it as well. I saw it yesterday, and I was like, wow. And then, of course, he goes on to simplify it initially, and like, nice. The message is pretty solid. Like, it's rule of diminishing returns. You put some stuff in as long as you're consistent, train reasonably hard for years and years, you get pretty jacked. And then he goes on to just spout bro science. So it's like maybe you should have made it a bit more complex. And actually, this is where science comes in, where you're able to tell apart the bro science from the non bro science and focus on the
Well,
important stuff and simplify it. You know,
what was the bro science? I see here something Smith machine.
he broke down muscle growth as being you stress your muscles, they break down and they grow back stronger. And progressive overload is how you get bigger. And finally, the mind muscle connection being super important for hypertrophy. And that besides just lifting the right weight, you just have to focus on making the right muscle work during the movement. And it's like you're overcomplicating things again here, and you're not even complicating the
Yeah,
right things.
yeah, that's true.
Horrible. Anyhow, the one comment on the same post was again 10 likes. I don't know. I personally think we're getting too far into the weeds of range of motion at this point. For the majority of lifters, this won't matter much. For range of motion is far simpler than taking every rep to lengthen partial. How does the lifter know exactly where to end each and every rep in that situation, especially when fatigue sets in? Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but full range of motion is going to be healthier on the joints. Maybe I'm just old and don't get it. I mean, hey, shit, you might be. Um, so it is clearly a widespread sentiment that sometimes people don't really want to complicate things, and sometimes, with range of motion, the impact of range of motion on hypertrophy isn't going to be huge. But if we're talking to the person who's trying to optimize things, it's going to be meaningful to them, right? And ultimately, with certain variables, i.e., range of motion, where the cost of implementation is minimal, you're going to your set anyways. You can't, may as well do the right range of motion. It doesn't take you much more effort. It takes you listening to one podcast episode on Revive Stronger, and you kind of know what's going on, and then you can go away and make more gains for the rest of your career.
But the irony is, brother, you're listening to Revive Stronger to four people talking for 2 hours on range of motion, or you're listening to Revive Stronger in general. You are deeper than you think already. So yeah, it's as simple as, hey, train hard, do a bunch of exercise for each lift, work in the 5 to 20 rep range, eat your food, be in a surplus to gain muscle, and just do that over time and train very close to failure. Yeah, that's the end of it. But if you're a nerd about gaining muscle, getting stronger, and obviously that complete putting aside the fact that Milo's a researcher in this area, and that's like, in order for things to be simple, somebody needs to look at the complicated side of them first. So if science doesn't do its part, then we can't have the simple practical takeaway. Yeah, sure, the practical takeaway, which was simple and easy to follow on the podcast as well, and every article that you've put out or every meme or every podcast, there's always a, hey, here's the 3 bullet points. If you don't want to listen to the details, that's what you need to do. But the complicated stuff comes before the simple stuff. Same goes with training to failure, or hey, how many days a week is ideal to train each muscle. Yeah, at this stage you could say, yeah, don't overcomplicate it. But if we didn't have a clear idea of whether one is better than the other, then we would need to deep dive, see what makes more sense, mechanisms, so on and so forth, so that we can then give people a simple takeaway.
For sure. I think the argument of don't overthink it, to keep it simple, it doesn't make a huge difference, is brought up in two contexts. The first one is in relatively good faith, and the only acceptable use almost. It's when the person doesn't actually give a shit about small effect sizes or like small differences, and actually genuinely just wants to focus on the basics, and they don't have time to listen to Revive Stronger or what have you. And in that case, honestly, man, fair enough.
Yeah.
Like you do you, go king, you're the good Chad, enjoy your gains, enjoy having a life too, and other hobbies besides lifting, and woo, great for you. And then the second context, which is actually I think more common, is when someone has a bias going into the argument, like whether it's for full range of motion or for a certain dietary strategy or what have you, and an argument is being made against that situation, and they don't really want to engage with the discussion. So like, why are you overthinking it? Lol, just do the Mike Menser approach, or just, why are you thinking it? Just follow body part split, what have you. And it's just a kind of a lazy rebuttal to anything, and it's because they don't want to think about it, which is fine. Again, if you can just say I don't want to think about it, I don't want to talk about it, fair enough.
Yeah, and don't engage with
Yeah,
content that is tailored for. It's like saying, "Oh, just save money, work hard, and get develop your career, make a lot of money, save, and do some basic investments. Don't overthink it." And posting that in forums where they're discussing finance. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
sure, for
You're
the
not helping
average
anyone
person.
here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a silly approach, especially when the area of research, as evident by the podcast itself, and that's why that podcast exists, and that's why there's some hype around range of motion. The area of research is limited. There's no there's only I mean, okay, I'm not going to do partials.
It's a range of motion episode. Let's fucking go. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, the area of research is limited, and in order to the practical takeaways for me as a lifter and as a coach and as somebody whose training is relatively simple and straightforward, and for most of my coaching is very non mumbo jumbo. The looking into the depths of the literature and what's coming out and trying to make sense of it is very important for me to be able to make those easy to follow practical takeaways. Because if the research, let's say the few studies that were coming out were mixed, so we had half showing partials and long musclings were better and half showing that they were worse, the practical takeaways there would not be as simple to make than they are now. But yeah, I don't know, I think people get triggered when they're something that has been sort of the default for them, and that's where proper science communication comes in place. Because again, common belief versus common knowledge, people are like, oh, okay, so this thing that we thought is the default and it's the best way to approach things may not be the default. I can't be bothered now. Can't be bothered to rethink things a bit, aka do a partial rep.
It's so challenging to think of partials. It's a lot of brain power. Um, on a serious note, I think this is kind of where it goes into the discussion of people who are detail obsessed or a bit neurotic about details
Yep.
versus people who are detail orientated, right? I think being as someone who wants to get the best results, or get very good results with relatively little effort, ideally, being detail orientated is a good thing, but just being aware of the fact that it's a detail, right?
Yep.
So when you're looking at range of motion, when you're looking at getting your fourth and fifth protein feeding of the day in versus just three,
Exactly.
when you're looking at getting a variety of rep ranges in your training program versus just two, for example, like getting some 30 rep sets in your program to make sure that you cover all the bases, etc. Um, when you're looking at things that make a relatively small difference in all likelihood, for people who want to get really good results, and for people who want to make the most of their time in the gym, which to be honest is probably most people, right? It's worth being aware of those details and of being aware of how much they matter relative to one another. So, for example, you don't emphasize getting your sets of 30 in above getting more than one meal a day in, right? Or eating enough protein in your day. Like, there are things that are more important and things that are less important, and knowing how they rank is important in making decisions as to what to focus on. Because
Yeah.
you might have times in your life when you're super busy and where those details matter a bit less. And you might have times in your life when you're not as busy and you actually want to put more effort into your gym, and in that case, those details start to matter more, and you have the time to do so. And that's where science communication comes in helpful as well, in helping those people understand what is important and what isn't.
Yep.
Because otherwise, people can actually buy, oh shit, it's all about the seed oils. Oh shit, it's all about only having meat in your diet. Or it's all about this one program and this one frequency and this one secret that no one's told me before. And because you have no idea of how magnitudes of effects work, you think that this one thing could very easily explain all of it. When in reality, yeah, just getting a good amount of sleep, managing your stress, training pretty consistently, training reasonably hard will take care of like the vast majority of it. But if you don't know that, because people haven't communicated that to you, you might think that the fucking supplement someone's selling you is going to make all the difference.
Yeah. No,
Um,
and the context matters. Hey, just buy an expensive computer, you'll be fine. Why are you looking into the specs so much? Why do you care if the processor is slightly better than the other one? You're overthinking this. Yeah, that's appropriate if my mother is asking, "Hey, should I get the MacBook Pro M1 or M2?" But if you have Mister Developer, whatever, you get the analogy, right?
Sorry, Pac. I see you're wearing a two-door watch. Don't you know that you have
Yes.
a phone on your a clock on your phone?
Yeah,
Why do you need a
was
wristwatch?
that was my first go to, but I was like, let's we're gonna get into the wristwatch podcast. But yeah, that's another point. Like with any hobby, so for a lot of people, for us, it's our passion, our career to an extent, and uh, we've dedicated our lives to. Hey, let's find out more about how to build muscle, get stronger, and improve body composition, whatever. For other people, it's a hobby. If you take any hobby seriously, in my opinion, and I have other hobbies as well, I think it's fair and you're respecting yourself by looking into it and geeking out. Like, I cannot understand people who are muscle heads, not just people that work out and like to go to the gym, but people who watch YouTube videos, buy supplements, but they've never really looked into it, you know? Like they're still following myths from back in the day. Yeah, they're watching content on YouTube, but mostly entertainment content. And the same goes on here. So if you're somebody who's consuming evidence-based fitness content and who is spending energy and potentially money in getting educated, and who may also be a coach, yeah, I expect you to listen to the Revive Stronger podcast or the whatever podcast about any topic and be like, oh, nice. Yeah, they really went into it there. If you're Joe McJoinson or Jane McJaninson, who just wants to be healthier, build muscle, and just likes to go to the gym and follow a basic program, sure. Hearing Milo Wolf and Mike Israel speak about range of motion for an hour and a half doesn't really matter. And if you work with Milo Wolf is not going to come to your house and be like, yes, so I'm going to be presenting my thesis today, chapter one. He's going to tell you, yeah, look, you could try this. If it doesn't feel great, that's fine. Just make sure
Doesn't feel
there's
great. Too bad. You're still doing it. Fuck all. Late impartial for nothing else.
let the Marshall's do it again. I'm going to read the literature to you now.
I don't like late impartial. Shut up. I said we're doing late
Shut up.
impartials.
All right, recite the Pedrosa study now.
Indeed.
You missed the citation format. That was Harvard, not APA.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think this can go the complete other end of the spectrum as well, though, where you
For
get
sure.
people who are new into lifting. And to be honest, it isn't like I don't mean to make it sound like it's their fault because it isn't, right? Because I was probably one of those guys when I was getting into lifting, where you're just getting into lifting and you are one of those people who are interested in maximizing your results and you acknowledge that, hey, there's some thinking involved here. I need to learn some stuff here. And these details may matter in reality. And so you start reading about, okay, well, first thing you learn, oh, how should I train? How many reps should I do? And then you slowly go down the rabbit hole into training frequency, into supplements, into a variety of other aspects, until you end up at a sad point in your life where you're taking 3 grams of leucine right before every meal. Um,
Beast.
Nothing personal about myself at all. Um, so I think for those people, it's easy to become neurotic about details, right? Because
Yep.
you oftentimes don't know how to distinguish between more important things and less important details yet.
Yep.
And that comes with time and with some degree of science literacy.
And
But
good science communication where we're being cautious. That's
for
why
sure,
you
it's on
hear us
us. Yeah,
being. That's why you hear us being so cautious, and like, we also we're also we also make speculative claims at some points. But when you're hearing a science communicator and you're not somebody that has a high level of scientific literacy, and you're hearing speculation presented as evidence, even if that's not done with bad intentions, because that person is used to speaking in that context, or maybe you are listening to a podcast that is meant to be that. Um, that's where always having the right disclaimers before and being cautious with how you express things as a science communicator makes a difference, because that's where I feel that a lot of people fall in the trap of, oh, okay, I want to do this the best way possible. Okay, now I've heard 6 different science communicators make speculative claims about like really optimizing things, but those speculative claims are bets, if anything, you know, bets that are not surefire bets as well. And then but they perceive those speculative claims as, okay, this is their take on mandatory steps to getting bigger and stronger. And that's where things get a bit weird. And that's where the, hey, just lift hard, sleep well, eat your food crowd sometimes wins, because you get the typical, the pencil neck RP 3 periodization protocol. Okay, brother, like, you're overthinking this a bit now.
No, for sure. And I think the second area where those folks win out is exactly there, actually, just like you said, where the people who are neurotic get detail obsessed and lose sight of the big things. And oftentimes, because they don't understand the relative importance of stuff, they'll actually put relatively smaller details and the more annoying details as well ahead of the bigger stuff.
Hmm.
So like they'll be like, okay, well, let me focus on my leucine supplementation before a meal. And then because they're so focused on all those small details, they sometimes don't even have time to train or something. And it's like, well, you just kind of missed on the most important part of all of this just to get your individual trees in place, you know?
Yeah. Or
So
consistency wise, a lot of people experience burnout simply because of that. And that's where, as coaches and as science communicators, we come in the picture and say, hey, look, as long as you're getting some sessions in and they're relatively hard and we're progressing those over time and you're eating your food, yeah, it would be ideal if you were able to get 5 to 6 protein feedings in it per day and get a bit more volume in or different rep ranges. But if it's either that or nothing, something in the middle is much better than nothing and may actually be closer to 100% than you think. So you may be talking about, hey, 95% of your potential gains. That 5% for Milo and I is a huge difference. Me gaining 2.5 or 5 kilos on my deadlift, for example, is huge. Or even gaining a kilo of muscle, one muscle, new muscle, please, is huge. But for many individuals, it won't be.
for sure. And I think that's where, as a coach, you kind of have to tailor your approach to the client you're dealing with. If you're dealing with someone who wants to really optimize everything and their lifestyle's in a good place and they want to compete in something, yeah, in that case, you can be quite detail orientated and give them access or almost permission to focus on those details more
Yeah.
than other people. But I think for a lot of people, it is a matter of just saying, okay, well, as a coach, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 sessions a week. I'm going to streamline the process as much as possible for you because you're busy, you have these things to do, etc. And then every now and then I've got clients, for example, who have their big things in place, right? Like they'll train pretty consistently and stuff, but they're not super consistent yet. But they'll still worry about like, oh, I've heard about this supplement called citrulline. Should I take that? And I'm like, I mean, the downside here isn't huge. So if you want to buy it and use it, fair enough. But it's really not that important. Focus on getting your training sessions in more consistently. So that's where the advice of don't overthink it, just be consistent and train hard is going to point you in the right direction. And then once you have that figured out, right, once you're being consistent, training reasonably hard, you can start thinking about the nuances if you have the time to do so, if you have the inclination to do so. But it's worth focusing on getting the big things in place first before you worry about the pebbles. You know,
Yeah, and those pebbles can be fun for people that like to take this extremely seriously and have this as a hobby. Same goes for strength athletes or physique competitors, where you will try things that may have no scientific or at least direct scientific evidence behind them, but you're also somebody who's trying to get 3% body fat and have shredded glutes to stand on it. Like, it's a niche hobby for people that want to geek out about muscle building or strength building. And yeah, I wanted to make an analogy with cars, but yeah, it's it's pointless. I don't know cars, but the same way that for people that buy super fast cars and then mod them as well, yeah, it makes zero sense. Has like, just buy a good car, but their hobby is, oh, how can we make it sound louder or go faster, and that's what they found meaning. And same with us here. So discounting that, and but that's not even the context that those comments were made in. Those comments were invalid in my opinion, because it's like, bro, it's a relatively new area of research that can directly impact how we simplify things. This is the guy who's literally doing his PhD on it, and who is laying that foundation for more research to do hypothesis testing and explore the topic more in the future. Shut the fuck up. Listen to the practical takeaways at the end, but don't be the yeah, you're overthinking this, bro.
Yeah, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. There's a time and place to say that to people, but it's not in the context of science communication and what have you. It's in the context of the one person who is actually overthinking it, who is actually focusing on details rather than the main things. And in that case, there's a point. Otherwise, you're just not willing to engage with the discussion, which is fine. It may not be for you. It may be for the people who actually want to delve into the details or what have you. So,
Exactly. Now, I think that we'll wrap this episode up. It's a
indeed,
short one, but it's a short and potent one. 30 minutes of pure
range of motion
muscle and
discussion.
feels craziness.
I love range
Um,
of motion episodes.
Another range of motion episode. But yeah, in all seriousness, beware of people that make those claims. And at the same time, guys, it's not either or. There are appropriate times where, hey, reading the 20,000 word article from Stronger by Science is great. Uh, there's other times where, hey, three simple bullet points will do it. But yeah,
Don't be that guy.
science, ooh.
Indeed. From Muscle and Feels, we out.
Peace. We're
Peace.
out of here, baby.